This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people who are making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss social commentary, and we explore society so we can discuss principles and the people who actually live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, in July, some 60 scholars and experts from various nationalities and institutions presented during the Notre Religious Liberty Summit convened in London, England. The three-day conference was held at the Honorable Society of the Inner Temple, a storied legal society in London where the likes of Mahatma Gandhi once studied, and it actually dates back all the way to the Knights Templar. One world religious leader, Camille N. General President of the Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, delivered a landmark address on religious liberty and participated in a wide array of illuminating and instructive conversations. President Johnson has seen and experienced the impact of religious freedom from unique positions in a successful legal career as a mother, community member, and now as the president of one of the world's largest and oldest women's organizations. President Johnson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So give us some sense of those that you convened with and gathered with in London at this historic summit, the Notre Dame Religious Liberty Summit.
Yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity to be with like-minded people working to protect religious liberty all over the world. I sat on a panel with a Catholic bishop from Nigeria and a rabbi who actually serves in England. He is a chaplain at a university there and was the only Jewish chaplain, he said, on the continent of Europe. So an interesting perspective that he brought to our discussion that day. But I had the opportunity in connection with the Religious Liberty Summit to meet and have beautiful conversations with like-minded people who were invested in protecting religious liberty. Some of them religious leaders, but many of them academics who have invested their academic careers on this subject.
It's such an important one, and part of your address I thought was so compelling. You actually went all the way back to the founding of the Relief Society and talking about this idea of expecting extraordinary occasions and pressing calls. Explain that for us in the context of religious liberty.
Well, that was a statement made by Emma Smith at the Organization of Relief Society in 1842. She said that the women would expect extraordinary occasions and pressing calls. So I used that as a way to introduce Relief Society and who I was, but also to explain that the protection of our religious liberty is one of those extraordinary occasions and pressing calls. And as we come together as religious leaders and as academics to do our part in protecting those vital liberties, our society will flourish.
Yeah, so important. And as you look at it, and part of the conference theme was around this idea of religious liberty and religious leaders dealing with authoritarian regimes. The church has had to navigate that in many ways, and you talked about some of those complexities.
Yeah, it is complex, but I think the church's approach has been quite straightforward and very simple, and that is wherever we are making an effort to serve and help. And so I was emphasizing the humanitarian efforts of religious organizations like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints always goes in through the front door. So we don't try to work around a government, but we go in through the front door. We've always expressed our political neutrality, not taking one side or another, but working to establish relationships with trusted partners that can help us achieve what we're aiming to do. And I highlighted the church's efforts to provide humanitarian relief all over the world.
Oh, I love that. And one of the other really compelling components of what you shared at this conference, and we've talked about this with religious leaders and atheists, this idea that religious liberty is sort of this precursor, not just to freedom, but to human flourishing. Explain that for us.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's scientific evidence that suggests that cultures are more peaceful, less violence when there's religious protection and religious freedom, when people have the opportunity to express their conviction to their God all of society is benefited.
Yeah, no question about it. And so what was the therefore what? What was the takeaway? What surprised you coming out of this conference?
I guess it was, for me, it was inspiring to see those group of people come together, focusing their energies on how we can work in unison to protect the rights of people around the world.
So important.
That was inspiring to be part of that.
Yeah, and so what's the call? What's the call for the women of the world as it relates to religious liberty?
Well, we have to speak up. And we have to speak out. And President Nelson has told us that we are the women foreseen by prophets of old that would need to take the stage and be willing to stand up for morality and for the protection of families. Some of these basic, fundamental truths are ones that we as women can champion. And this was an opportunity for me to do that. But there's an opportunity for the women of Relief Society, the members of Relief Society, every single day to stand up for truth.
Oh, such an important conversation. Well, we're going to stay with the conversation with President Camille N. Johnson as Sunday Condition continues here on KSL News, KSL TV. Radio's on weekdays, the TV's on Sunday. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're continuing our conversation with Camille N. Johnson, General President of the Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we want to stay with this theme of women, what they're doing around the world, something extraordinary, expecting extraordinary occasions and pressing calls. And that's something you've been talking about in terms of relief, but also in terms of just other things that women are doing that are extraordinary occasions and pressing calls. Tell us about that.
Well, we view our responsibility, motivated by keeping the first and second great commandments, of course, to love God and love our neighbor. We view our responsibility to provide relief to include all of God's children. And so without regard to political party, tribe, race, or region, our obligation is to bring the Savior's relief, both temporal and spiritual, to the world. And the women have had an important and critical role to play in all of that since the very beginning of Relief Society. Temporal relief is a space where sisters have flourished. They tend to know what the needs of their neighbors are and how to satisfy them. And I hope that our sisters feel like whenever they provide that simple relief, a reach across the fence, a telephone call to a neighbor to check in on someone, that they're part of a global effort, because that's really how we take care of global needs, is one person at a time. So while there's big and grand projects happening where we're trying to tackle things like child malnutrition around the world, there's also children who are malnourished in our own communities. And so we can look right here close to home for opportunities to serve the one, to bless the lives of the one, and I hope still feel part of and connected to that global humanitarian effort, which is possible because we have our religious liberty and our religious protections in place. I think, so they connect. They're all interconnected.
They do, and that upward spiral, rather than a downward spiral, is so powerful. And it is. Sometimes we look for those big projects when really we just need to go help our neighbor. We have talked in the context of Ukraine, Afghanistan, that freedom and relief has a very feminine face around the world. And you've seen that, including in places like Africa. Give us a sense of that.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to travel this last year to Africa and to participate with UNICEF. We were assessing some of the programs that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has contributed to in the northeast part of Uganda. And it was really a privilege and a blessing and a life-changing experience for me to be there with those beautiful people and to be part of efforts to educate them, primarily mothers. There were dads there too, but primarily educating mothers on what they can do to bless the lives of their children and providing ways for them to do that. Part of it's education, part of it's giving them opportunity, but what we're always trying to build is self-reliance in people. And it was really a sweet opportunity to see the contributions of our members at work. You know, our members contribute to a humanitarian fund, and those dollars are available to make these kinds of projects happen. And so I hope everyone, I wish you would understand the gravity of your contribution. It may feel like the widow's mite when you're giving it, but it puts us in a position to be able to address the most vulnerable of our Heavenly Father's children, because people have been so generous.
Yeah.
And not just with their money,
yeah.
but also with their time and their talents.
Yeah.
We are the bishop's storehouse, and
Yeah.
our time and our talents and our resources are what we bring to bear and we contribute. And so some contribute with financial resources, and others may just have time or a talent to contribute. But all of that is part of caring for those in need and fulfilling our responsibility to love God and our neighbor.
And that is how communities get lifted
Yeah.
and society gets blessed. And I often think we miss the most important part of the widow's mite. We often focus on the mite, but I am sure she dropped off a loaf of bread and visited a new mom, or dropped off a blanket or something on her way before she cast that in. There's so much to it.
Thought a lot about her as well. I've always thought of her as, I used to think of her as an elderly widow. And I've started thinking recently, maybe she was a young widow with children of her own, and she wondered how she was going to feed them that day. But she felt a connection to God and a commitment, a covenant, a promise to make her contribution. She must have had a deep testimony that her situation would be, she would be provided with relief.
Yeah.
I don't know that day whether or not extra resources came her way so that she could provide for her family, or whether she was just able to weather the storm that day and get through a hungry day.
Yeah.
But she had that conviction that in keeping her covenant, in keeping her promises, she'd be blessed.
Yeah, and that
Love that
interconnectedness.
story.
I love
Yeah,
that. That's so powerful. We have just a couple minutes left. You spoke recently to some young people.
Yes.
And give us a sense of what's the message for them today. They have so many challenges that they face and so many pressures in so many ways, but what's your message to the young people today?
Well, I did have an opportunity to address the YSA conference that was held for the entire state of Utah. And one of my messages had to do with the humanitarian relief that the church provides. Our young people want to change the world. They want a cause. And what I was hoping to instill in them is a better understanding that the cause in which they're engaged as disciples of Jesus Christ is a world-changing cause. That being a part of, by contributing what you have in the Bishop's Storehouse, your resources, your time, your talents, you are contributing to that world change.
Yeah.
I gave some examples about the efforts that the church has made to provide water relief by way of example. And then I talked a little bit about the Savior being living water. So it's important for us to provide that temporal relief, clean water, but we also want to bring his living water, that spiritual relief that the Savior offers. So I hope our young people feel engaged and part of that global cause. So important. President Camille Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today on Sunday Edition. A great work, a global ministry, and impacting neighbor, community, and society. Thanks so much for your efforts and for leading this large, amazing, global, worldwide women's organization that is not only promoting religious liberty, but is making a difference in individual lives. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Boyd.
Well, September is Suicide Prevention Month, and it's time to get comfortable with what can be an uncomfortable conversation. Ganel-Lyn Condie joins me to elevate our thinking in this crucial area for our community when Sunday Edition continues. Stay with us. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. September is Suicide Prevention Month, and I'm very thankful to have one of my favorite thinkers and voices, Ganel-Lyn Condie. Joining me for this crucial conversation, Ganel-Lyn is an author, an advocate, she's a speaker and a steward, she's a podcaster, and she's just a force for good in the world. And Ganel-Lyn, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me.
It's great to be on the TV version of our conversation.
It is. This is one of those crucial conversations. I don't know anyone anywhere who hasn't been touched by suicide in one way or another, and yet we still have all of the stigmas, we have all of the challenges. It seems to me that we still haven't quite got the conversation right.
Well, I think what you lead out with is such an important point. It affects everyone, and so when we make it about a certain demographic as if it's not our issue, then I think we already denormalize or shift the conversation in a place that we don't, it's not a comfortable topic to deal with, but the reality is all of us are dealing with mental health or love someone that's struggling with some mental health issues. And so that's kind of everyone on the planet. There's not a group that this doesn't affect.
Yeah, and so as we try to normalize that conversation a little bit and broaden it out, how do we start leaning into that just a little more? Because it's easy to say it's them, it's their problem, it's this demographic, it's those folks, it's not me or mine. How do we change that dynamic?
Well, I mean, I'm grateful we get a whole month of like already having it on our hashtags and on our feed. And so, you know, I hope that when we do content like this, it spurs further conversations. But I like to invite people to do it in their normal life. So I invite, especially parents, to tell their teenagers to pull out their phones, start a group text. Everyone text an emoji that represents where their mental health is that day. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a million emojis. Find a teenager, they'll show you. And right there, that shows us that it's not happy, sad, or mad. We have a lot of emotion and a lot of ways in checking in with each other, in the car ride, in the dinner table conversation, but use the phone instead of making it the enemy. Use the tool that maybe your loved one already feels comfortable with.
That's good. I want to stay with that normalizing for a minute, because sometimes I think as parents, we try to be a little too perfect, that everything's okay or we got this. How can we be a little more courageously vulnerable, and how can that help our young people, especially those who are dealing with some of these mental health challenges?
I love that question, especially for the fathers out there. When you come home and say you went to therapy that day, right there, it gives permission for the people that love you, that support you, that maybe you're raising or caring for, to have their own conversation with you at a future date. We plant those seeds when we say, you know what, I'm not doing great. For anyone that knows me on social media, the last few months have been tough. And some of the feedback I've gotten is that posting about kind of the vulnerability, the changes, the losses that I've gone through has given them permission to have those conversations. Because there's this perception sometimes of like our coworker or someone we see on social media that they're checking all the boxes. So especially with our kids, I love when my children say back to me now as adults, you know what, Mom, you gave us permission to do the scary thing because you told us it was scary.
Yeah. So good. So good. Let's talk about it in terms of therapy. Sometimes that becomes one of those bad words, but so important, especially when dealing with depression or suicide ideation. How do we change that from what you call taking it from therapy to education? Because education's awesome.
Education's awesome. And for those that know my story, my sister died by suicide 9 years ago, and she was in her 40s. And she had addressed her mental health issues and sought help. But I would say in the last 9 years, the good news is therapy is a much broader term. We're not just talking about traditional talk therapy. EMDR is something that's super effective with trauma response. There's so many modalities out there now that 9 years ago, it kind of was just this, there were these three things we considered therapy. So first and foremost, consider the fact that therapy is education. No one's embarrassed about getting more education.
That's right.
Like if you said to a friend, I'm gonna go back to school, I'm gonna work on another degree, everyone would celebrate that. So why aren't we celebrating that when we seek for support, we're actually seeking for education, and that's always a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk about those who are in, we call it the big black hole. They're in that dark space. They're wondering, you have a way of shaping that statement that I think is really important for all of us, whether we're in that space personally struggling or we know someone who's in that space.
Yeah, the tagline I've probably used most often in the last 9 years in writing and speaking and doing interviews like this is that we're never gonna be better without you. And when I have people reach out to me on social media, or I hear back feedback after someone hears a conversation that I have like this, that kind of sticks in their head. And the other thing I like to say is stay in your body. These bodies of ours are all flawed. We all have things that we wish we could get like 2.0, 3.0 versions of, or in Apple's case, what, 14.0 of whatever the bodies are. And yet they're gifts for us. We are stewards over them. And for some people that are really dealing with a chronic, like my sister, lifetime battle with mental health, that stewardship is heavier. It's not just a system that shows up once in a while because there's been a pandemic or there's been a situational loss that creates that depression or anxiety. For some people, this is kind of a lifetime chronic battle that they've got to deal with. And so for me and for those around me, I like to repeat that phrase often. We will never be better without you. And the reality is we all can get in our heads where we have those thoughts that like, hey, I've had this failure or I've let these people down. and maybe I would be doing everyone a favor if I wasn't here. That's the great lie that I hope, if no one remembers anything else from this conversation, that in your closets or in the car at night when you're really wondering, I think I'm not actually a benefit to this world anymore. It's just not true. My life's not better without Meg. I've taken that stewardship of her loss and tried to give back in some way, but there's not a day that goes by that I feel like my life's better because she's not here.
Yeah, so important. These are crucial parts of the conversation. Some great resources. The 988 number, of course, in crisis.
I love that it's 3 digits. Like, we don't need to make it complicated.
So good. Ganel-Lyn Condie, appreciate your stewardship.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your leadership in this important topic. Thanks for joining us
today.
Thank
you.
Well, only those who have been to the brink and back know that crushing, suffocating, mind-reeling moment that precedes a suicide attempt. However, many do know the overwhelming discouragement, loss of hope, and feelings of worthlessness that accompany debilitating anxiety and deep depression. For those who find themselves at the bottom of that black hole of depression or despair and may be considering an alternative to life or know someone who's in that space, remember that it's against the laws of nature and nature's God that storms last forever. Storms come and then they go. Are they hard? Yes. Painful? Yes. Frightening? Absolutely. But there is always hope. There's always a way out, and it starts with reaching out. You know, I have framed on my desk a simple story my daughter Sarah gave me. It tells of a guy walking down a street, and he falls into a big black hole. The walls are so steep, he's hurt and wounded, he can't get out. A doctor passes by, and the guy shouts up, "Hey, can you help me?" The doctor writes a prescription, throws it down into the hole, and moves on. Then a priest comes along. The guy shouts up, "Father, I'm down in this hole. I'm hurt. Can you help me?" The priest writes out a prayer, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Finally, a friend walks by. "Hey, can you help me?" And the friend jumps down in the hole. He says, what are you doing? Now we're both down in the hole." The friend says, "Yeah, I know, but I've been down in this big black hole before, and I know the way out." So remember, you're not alone. There's many of us who've been at the bottom of that big black hole, and we know the way out, and we can find the way out together. So if anyone you care about or you yourself are in a bad place today, remember the 988 suicide prevention line or the Safe UT app. This is a chance for all of us to reach out, to reach together, to link arms, and to get past this once and for all. Thanks for watching Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson, and as always, remember, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.